The public health crisis I chose to research was the current fishery disaster in the Apalachicola Bay. Less than 5 years ago, the Apalachicola Bay oyster fishery was one of the most productive in the nation. The bay typically produced 90% of Florida's oysters and 10% of the country's. 12,000 to 14,000 jobs relied on this market. In 2012, farmers harvested 3 million pounds of oysters. Then in 2013, only 1 million pounds, and in 2014, only 126,142 pounds. Currently, farmers are only catching about a bag and a half per day. Basically, a market that used to thrive, provide food and jobs for thousands of people, is being completely depleted and may even have to shut down completely. After the BP oil spill in 2011, overharvesting in this area severely depleted the population of oysters in the bay. Then, a devastating drought exacerbated the issue to the point that the federal government declared a fishery disaster. These events pushed Florida to request more water be pulled from Lake Sidney Lanier in Georgia, the upstream water source of the Apalachicola Bay, which started another dispute between the two states. Florida called on the Supreme Court to resolve the dispute, but the final court ruling prohibited drawing more water from Lake Sidney Lanier. Florida officials say that these are the reasons for the extreme loss of oysters in the bay. By not receiving enough fresh water from upstream, salinity is increasing in the typically brackish environment. This provides ample environment for more saltwater predators and diseases. Droughts and other natural disasters only make the crisis worse. Although this cause is widely accepted, Georgia officials refuse to believe that their control over water is a contributor, and instead blames the lack of oysters on Florida's poor management. The FWC has imposed many regulations in an attempt to solve the issues, such as limiting oyster fishing to 4 days a week, closing some entirely, and imposing a new maximum of 5 sacks per day as opposed to the previous maximum of 20 sacks per day. Much of the money that BP has contributed following the oil spill is going towards attempting to replenish the beds, but it is only being used for a technique called barge shelling. This is when large ships drop shells in depleted areas in order to provide homes for oyster larvae. But this technique isn't very efficient because although it drops a lot of shells and covers large distances, it doesn't target specific spots and therefore doesn't work as well. Federal funding and locals partnering with the University of Florida have helped to launch a shelling program where many of the oystermen are now laying shells to promote growth. This, of course, takes much more time and manual labor, so it only covers small areas, but it has been much more successful and simultaneously provided jobs for the oyster farmers who would be out of work. I believe it's going to take programs like these to replenish the oyster population. But more than that, an agreement needs to be made between Georgia and the southern states that are affected by Georgia's use of Lake Sidney Lanier. This public health crisis might only majorly affect the 14 or so thousands of farmers whose livelihood depends on this business, and the other large portion of people who enjoy oysters as a food source. But this sort of problem is seen all around the world, and in most other cases, it comes down to separate entities realizing the effects that they have on each other and coming to an agreement that can provide sustainable resources for all parties involved.